So welcome to Personal Finance. My name is Derbin, and I've been teaching economics in particular, finance, a number of times over the years, meaning for the last 15, 20 years. I've been teaching lots of econ courses and plenty of finance courses thrown in there too. But anyhow, just wanted to, as we launch into this personal finance course, I want to just go over a couple of items very quickly. So with chapter 1, of course, we're looking at the time value of money. But, stepping back, this whole notion, this idea of finance really is centered around what I like to look at it in terms of like you're estimating cash flows. You're estimating your cash flow going forward, and you're stripping things down into cash, if you will, and then again projecting kind of going forward, forecasting what it is that those expenses and so on and so forth are going to be going forward. So that's kind of the crux of finance. It's not accounting. Remember now, they can be they're intertwined in many ways, but accounting, we certainly use financial statements that are derived from accounting in terms of like income statements and balance sheets and just the whole the lingo, the jargon, the words that we use are definitely like from finance. But the reality is that econ at its root, or excuse me, finance rather at its root, is much more economics oriented. Frankly, accounting has a lot of economics in it as well. But at any rate, what I mean by that is that especially when we're talking about this time value of money concepts, these are certainly economics, major topics in economics. At any rate, the one last thing before we kind of really launch into the material is that I want you to keep in mind something that I'm going to say over and over again, and I apologize up front, but it's something that's imperative to kind of get your head wrapped around, and that is the concept of paying yourself first. It's absolutely imperative to pay yourself first, to think about things kind of going forward in terms of personal finance, paying yourself first. And again, what I mean by that is that it can come in a lot of different ways. It could be setting aside $5 a week, a month, what have you, something that you set aside, because what happens is with this concept, the way your cash flows, your income, for example, the first thing you have to do, of course, is pay taxes. Typically after that, what you spend on things that you need. And then, of course, whatever is left over is your savings, right? So I want you to kind of flip this around so that you focus more on taking something out first from your savings, and then whatever is left over, work on your spending so far as that is concerned. And what I meant by many different ways, it's not just throwing money into a savings account or investing or this or that. It could be something as simple as you have a outstanding credit card balance that is very high, 15, 20%, what have you. And by working on that first, you are in essence paying yourself first. Okay, so onward we go. So jumping right into chapter 1, again, we'll start with these learning objectives, and these are things that crop up or they will be presented in a fairly standard, normal fashion going through the entire course, through this entire book. So learning objective 1, 1-1, learning objective 1, meaning chapter 1, learning objective 1, analyze the process for making personal financial decisions. So we're going to be taking a very methodical, and at times it might seem oversimplifying or drilling down too much on some of these concepts, but it's important to kind of get the framework kind of established as we go through. And that's the reason why we really drill down and try to analyze this process, the process that we employ ourselves to make these very personal financial decisions. And I have to emphasize personal, because this is based on individual needs, individuals' desires, and we all have different take on these things, and one is typically no better than the other. But what is actually very, very important is to understand kind of the difference between that structure, that scaffolding that we have before us, how we go about negotiating it, That's different for everybody, but the scaffolding itself typically is pretty standard, which is for some is disappointing because there's no easy way to get from point A to point B, and everybody has to travel that same that's not necessarily the same path, but they've got to go from point A to point B. Anyway, moving on. Objective 2, assessing personal and economic factors that influence personal financial planning. Again, this drills down on the reality that we all face, and we all, again, have different realities. For example, everyone in this class, I guarantee you, is much younger than I am. So we're in different situations in our lives. Different priorities are set for us as we kind of go forward. So these are all things to kind of keep in mind. And it's not a matter of how you compare yourself to the next person, and this, in relatively speaking, you want to look at, again, personalize this, meaning look at your own situation, and from that, understanding where you're at, you're able to achieve, again, as we talk about with objective 3, develop personal financial goals. You set your goals, your 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 15-year plan, 20-year plan. You set it out in front of yourself, and how you achieve those goals. This is what we'll be talking about, again, going through this class. Objective 4, calculate the time value of money to analyze personal financial decisions. Now, when we talk about the time value of money, it's absolutely important to understand what that means, that relationship between time and the value of your money. For example, just a real quick example, if you have $1 or $100 in your bank, your credit union, what have you, in some sort of savings vehicle, what is it that you expect back in, we'll just say, 1 year from now or 2 years from now? First, perhaps foremost, you want to get back your $100. So you are actually being separated from that. Your money, you're deferring your consumption is really what it comes down to. So rather than consuming that $100, you are going to be setting it aside, and you are actually going to, in a sense, you're going to transfer ownership of that $100 over to some other institution. Again, whether it's a bank, credit union, your cousin, whomever, you're going to be transferring it. You will no longer have that in your possession. You'll have a statement saying that you have ownership and so on and so forth. But the reality is, though, that $100 bill or that $100 is no longer in your possession, it's someone else's possession. So 1 year from now, you want what back? You want your principal. You want your $100 back. You also expect what? This is where the value part of this comes in, the time value, meaning that you want to be compensated for being separated from your money for a certain period of time. It's very straightforward. That's the time value of money. It is the basis for interest. In a financial sense, it's a basis for, why it is that we charge people interest, why it is that we, with our other hat on as a lender, why it is that we expect interest to be paid to us. Okay, and we'll go through the calculations that are involved with it. It's pretty straightforward, and we won't get into too great a detail, but you get the idea. So lastly, in chapter 1, we're looking at strategies that we're going to employ to achieve those financial goals. And again, as I've noted before, all of us have different life situations. And for me, it's far different than any of you. But even within the ranks of this class, different people will have different varying financial situations and differing goals and expectations of what they want going forward. Okay. So again, now drilling down on this on objective one. What is analyzing the process for making personal financial decisions? What is personal financial planning? It's the process of managing your money to achieve personal economic satisfaction. Again, finance in its broadest meaning, in a meaning of the meaning of finance, really comes down to how it is you're going to be processed, the process that you're going to for managing your money. And the number one rule of finance is something to kind of get along, that we'll get to as we move along, is that if your cash flow exceeds the cost, then oftentimes that is a go sign for proceeding forward in terms of whether or not you're going to be making that expenditure. For example, you just think you're out of college and you're starting a new job, and you've got things kind of laid out. Unfortunately, you've got a very old vehicle, and your new job is 20 miles away, and you have to make a financial decision in this process. And that financial decision, what that boils down to, is that you have to make a determination as to whether or not your old car will be satisfactory. If you have to do extensive maintenance on the vehicle, if you want to purchase a new vehicle, or a different vehicle, I should say, whether or not it's new or used. All these things this is all part of that financial planning that's involved with making these decisions. This is the heart and soul, if you will, of finance. Okay, so onward. So advantages of personal financial planning is increased effectiveness in obtaining use and protecting financial resources. So what this boils down to, again, is that when you're looking at your financial resources, however meager or however great they are, it's your objective is to do, hopefully, or at least in general, is for two reasons. One is to preserve your capital, preserve whatever that $100, preserve that $100, and making decisions as to how best to increase the value of that $100 that we had talked about before, and protecting yourself in terms of establishing some sort of a relationship between risk and reward. What that means is that, okay, we all want what? We all want to earn, we would all like to see a 50% return on our investment over 1 year, that $100 turning into $150. However, what's involved with that is that you would be, without a doubt, encumbering or taking on a huge amount of risk. And what that risk means is you can break it up into different categories, so on and so forth, but simply this. One risk is that you may not get back the $100 you started with. Secondly, you may not end up getting the rate of return that you were anticipating, that 50% rate of return. There's a tremendous amount of risk that's associated with this high rates of return. Onward, increase control of one's financial affairs by avoiding excessive debt, bankruptcy, and dependence upon others. And this is looking more like a long-term prospect, actually from very short-term to longer-term, if you will. When we're talking about excessive debt, it goes back to what I was saying before about your initial financial decision. You make these financial decisions based on what cash flow will result from those decisions. And if it's a positive cash flow, you go forward. Oftentimes in making these decisions, you wouldn't go out, for example, and you find that you really want, and it makes some financial sense for you to purchase a vehicle that costs $25,000. But that $25,000, if you do not have the cash, means that you have to borrow. And if you have to borrow $25,000, that is that becomes your debt, what you owe, the overall amount that you owe, if you will. So you have to be focused on that. The second piece that we're talking about is bankruptcy, and bankruptcy comes in two different formats. One is Chapter 7 and Chapter 11. We'll get to that later on. But really what that boils down to is that bankruptcy is when you can no longer meet your financial obligations, in short, right? Whether it means that you need a little bit of time more to meet your obligations. So if you have $500 worth of bills that you have to deal with on a monthly basis, if you can renegotiate with your lenders and come to some sort of agreement where you can make your terms of payments longer, for example, or reduce your interest rate, that's one form of bankruptcy where you manage that end of it. So your $500 a month or $5,000 a month or whatever turns into some smaller number, either because you're negotiating lower terms in terms of the actual payment, or possibly or in conjunction with a longer time frame in which to repay your debts. The other is when you cannot repay your debts at all, and there's no way that you're going to be able to do that. You're just going to go deeper and deeper and deeper into debt, and that's more of a total bankruptcy. That's the one that we typically think of, and that's where your debts are erased and so on and so forth. And these are just aspects of finance, if you will. And lastly is dependence upon others. Others meaning our parents, our siblings, our relatives, our friends, the bookie down the street, loan sharks, etc. This is where we walk that line. We say that in economics is it's a study of scarcity, but it's also has much to do with marginal analysis, meaning that we all live on the margins. No matter who we are, no matter what our financial situation is, we make these decisions, and the decisions that we make are at the margins. There's always some risk of it and of working, going in the wrong direction, so on and so forth. So all these things to keep in mind. This is where we're trying to develop that scaffold that I had referenced earlier, that to understand the pitfalls that are out there in our way, if you will. Improve personal relationships. What this really focuses on is, remember, the personal side of this, is that the number one concern that people have, aside from things like speaking in public or the fear of one's own mortality, the fear of death, so on and so forth, right up there at the top of the list, probably above or below the fear of going to the dentist or whatnot, is your financial relationship. If you can put yourself on solid financial ground, and again, paying attention to that scaffolding that I had mentioned before. Remember, scaffolding, all I'm talking about is some sort of a setup where there's some certainty as to an idea of what you're looking at in terms of your financial life. And if you set that up, if you have that properly going, that's one less thing that would be interfering with your personal relationships, your decisions so far as getting married, for example. Again, this is early on, but this is all part of it. We all think about these things. Parents are always concerned about financial situations. It's probably among the top conversations that families chat about, fight about, whatever. Lastly, enhance freedom from financial worries obtained by looking to the future, anticipating expenses, and achieving personal economic goals. This is a fancy way of saying that we hope for the best, we plan for the worst. So meaning that I've just been going through this myself, and it's on a really personal note, is that making sure that you hear your financial situation. I'm not going anywhere, hopefully. your financial situation is in order, so that it ensures the continued ensures the continued well-being, if you will, of loved ones. Making sure that you think of all the exigencies, all the possible bad things that can go wrong, and you try to avoid them, of course, but also to account for them. So, for example, the idea of insurance. Insurance is a great example. You buy insurance, and this is kind of the insurance principle, to offset the downside of things as they're kind of going forward. You buy auto insurance in the event that you have an accident. Not that you want to go out and have an accident. You buy life insurance in the event, the eventuality or the likelihood or the possibility of you dying, whether in terms of accident or so on and so forth. It's all the same, falls under the same umbrella, if you will. Planning for the worst, hoping for the best, right? All right, so the financial planning process itself, as you can see, it's funny, it's a circle, and I've always gotten a kick out of this. But the reason being is that once you get started on the circle, it's like studying economics. Once you get started on this, there's no end to it. For better or for worse, it doesn't matter. This is just the reality. We get up in the morning and we stretch and we brush our teeth, take a shower, eat our breakfast, and off to school, off to work, whatever the plan is, or whatever your standard operating procedure or practices. This is basically the same thing. So just treat it as such. It's something that it's a pain to kind of get your head wrapped around, but it's something that you can carry with you going forward. Number one, determine your financial situation. Find out where the heck you're at, where you are at in this continuum, right? Secondly, develop your financial goals. What is it that you want to achieve? Do you want to go on vacation in 6 months? Do you want to go on vacation, a nicer vacation in 1 year or 2 years from now? Do you want to to try to save up for college? Are you trying, do you want to do whatever number of things, developing your financial goals? Do you want to buy a car? Do you want to buy a new vehicle next year or the year after? Remember, this is ongoing, because once you buy a car, you're going to have to replace it at some point. Just an example. Identify alternative courses of action. This is back to, there are many, many ways of getting from point A to point B. The path that you take is something that's very, very personal, and you evaluate those alternatives. And in number 4, by doing what? Assessing risk, time value of money, that opportunity cost. This is the first introduction of this term, opportunity cost. And what opportunity cost is fundamental in economics. And I will mention this kind of going forward, and we'll flesh it out further as we go forward. But opportunity cost, what that means is that when you make a decision to purchase something, so you have your $100, you can consume it right now, or you can defer consumption on some or all of it. That deferring the consumption, setting it aside for for 1 year, for example, the opportunity cost associated with that is very high, because tell me who couldn't find some, I'm using air quotes, good use of $100. We could all use it for any number of things, and we would have many, many options as to what it would be that we would like to purchase with that $100. But the opportunity cost, so for example, if you opt to save the $100, you're foregoing something else. You're giving up something else. You're giving up the new pair of jeans, or new outfit, or some other new technical device. Anyways, you get the idea. It's what you're giving up. What you are is what you are foregoing in order to set that $100 aside. That is the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is what we don't purchase, or is what we don't buy, or the action that we do not take. So what we're saying is that by putting this money aside and getting our very, very small rate of interest in a bank savings account, we're saying that that is worth more to us than going out and spending it on something. Okay. The next piece that we're looking at is what we have to consider. We consider life situation, personal values, and economic factors. This is the reality that we face that's right in front of us at the moment. You have $100. Your car breaks down. You don't have much choice, typically, but to do what? To fix the car. Or you have to put gas in the tank, and it's going to cost you $100 over the course of the next month. For gasoline, to purchase the gasoline. So you have to consider all these things. These are all part and parcel of that opportunity cost, if you will. Your personal values. It's important for you to be dressed nicely, or more, to be, this is where our personal likes, dislikes, so on and so forth come into view. And lastly, their economic factors. Some of us have more than others. Some of us have less than others. Some of us have economic factors that dictate where that $100 is going to go. If you have to buy food, you have to buy food, right? No matter what, we have to buy food. We need food to sustain ourselves. We need food and shelter. All these things kind of come into play, these economic factors. Create and implement your financial plan with all these things under consideration. You charge ahead. You're moving on. Always trying to move ahead with this is to develop your financial plan, creating your financial plan. And 6 is the review and revising the financial plan. What that means is that, okay, you saved your $100 and you end up going to your bank and you find out that you ended up with the 1% return. So you ended up with $101. And you have to think to yourself, do I leave it here again for another year? Forget about it for another year. Or do I take some other avenue? Go ahead and use that money toward a down payment of a vehicle. Use that $100 for some other rationale, and that's when you go back through this whole process again. You have to determine what your financial situation is. Can you afford to let the money sit for another year? Maybe you decide that you can actually afford to let that money sit for more than a year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 years. You can have it going forward. And that's when you're looking at that, when you can be separated from your money for a longer period of time, that's when you start encountering such things as higher rates of return. Because you're separated from your money for a longer period of time. That is the time value of money component. The longer you're separated from your money, the higher is the rate of return that you would expect or require, if you will. Anyway, onward. So drilling down again on step 1, determining your current financial situation, evaluate your income, savings, living expenses, and debts. This is tough because this is where you really have to be honest with yourself. You've got to dig into these details to find out exactly where you're at. And for most of us, it's not always the prettiest of pictures, okay? But it's important to figure out where you're at so that you can figure out how to move ahead with that. So prepare a list of current assets and debt balances. Assets are things that you own. The $100, the clothes on your back, if you will, if you own a home. These are all things that kind of add into this. And by the way, if you own a home, how much of the home do you actually own? So on the one side, debits on the left, credits on the right. We won't get into that. But on the one side of this, we're talking about your home being an asset. Say you have a home that's worth $100,000. You owe $80,000 in your home. So in essence, you really own $20,000 of, or 20% of that $100,000 home. The asset is $100,000, the home itself, and you own 20,000 of that. So these are things that we kind of have to keep in mind. And debt is the amount that is outstanding. So again, you have a $100,000 home, but you owe $80,000. That's your debt balance, the amount that you owe on that given asset, if you will. So last thing is matching financial goals to current income and potential earning power. This is something that every person, every institution, every entity has to come to grips with, whether you're talking about individuals, again, corporations, companies, businesses, governments. You have to come to some understanding of what your income is and what your potential income earning power is going forward, if you will. Anyway, step 2 is financial planning process to develop financial goals, identify feelings about money, and the reason for those feelings. Money is what? Money is, we can get into definitions in economics, but very straightforward. Money consists of what is called M1 money, meaning cash, currency, coins, and also whatever you have in your checking account. Okay, that's money that can be easily converted. It's very, very liquid into making those purchases and so on and so forth. But the takeaway from this is that money is, at its very root, it's something that we use for one of two things, either for transactions, to buy things, or for asset purposes, to hold on to that money for a period of time. And we have to, these are things that we have a very difficult time, and oftentimes we don't learn this as much as we should, or as well as we should from within our family structure. It's very important. I've had students that have taught their parents many of these things. Excuse me for a moment there. And so taught their parents, taught siblings, loved ones, friends, and so on and so forth. This is a lifelong process, by the way, is getting your head around what this concept of money truly is. And the sooner you do that, on a very, very personal note, the better off you'll be. I'm not young, and I've always had my own my own encounters with money as well. So I'm no different than anyone else. Determine the source of your feelings about money, facts or influence of others. Again, very straightforward. Trying to get your head wrapped around this concept. It's a major aspect of coming into adulthood. And these are things that you could talk about with your parents, for example, until the expression is until the cows come home, meaning you can talk to people about this stuff over and over, and they'll give you their opinions and their views on this and so on and so forth. But what you will notice is that there is one thing that is concurrent that all of them have in mind, and that is that they all have thought about this a great deal. And probably universally, they have not come to grips with the concept, if you will, of money in its totality. Meaning not that you'll ever get there. I haven't really arrived there myself, but I think I've got a pretty decent understanding of what money really is at its root. It's not the end game, the goal, so on and so forth. But what it does is that if you have a healthy relationship with that concept of money, it will make life much smoother for you, hopefully. Anyway, there are things that happen, so we deal with them as they come along, but it's kind of important to set money in its proper place. It's always in front of you, but you have to be able to say the money is not you and you are not your money, so on and so forth. It's a back and forth relationship. However, you have to make sure you put it in its proper perspective. It's a tool. is really what it comes down to. Determine the basis for your financial priorities, social pressures, peer pressure, household needs or desires. These are all things that kind of come up. And this is, again, where you have to be, excuse me, very honest with yourself. Because decisions that we make are not always, the parameters for those decisions, the framework of those decisions are not always abundantly clear, and they're not always objective, meaning, you have to, pretty straightforward, you have to eat, so in order to eat, you have to buy food. You have to be able to secure food. In order to secure food, you have to be able to buy. You need money, the resources to buy that. However, that's when you start getting into different preferences, and it goes way down into that rabbit hole, if you will. So these are things that we have to be aware of. Social pressures, again, household needs or desires. And this takes a lot of reflection, keeping this in mind. Lastly, decide on your specific financial goals to pursue for your situation. Again, making this very, very personal, and always going back to that cycle that we talked about, reviewing this. These things update, these things change, life changes constantly. That's one thing that we know for sure, is that change is always, always with us. So this is where when we encounter those changes, for example, this is where we have to consider different alternatives. The different alternatives, measuring opportunity costs, measuring, which choices really are more suitable for us, which choices that we face, so on and so forth. Common course of actions would include continuing the same course of action. You're going to keep your $100 in the bank, even though it's only earning 1%. You don't really need it right away, and you're satisfied with the 1% rate of return because you are very, very risk averse, we'll say, for example. Expand the current situation, meaning you may want to add more. May be able to say, well, I can add another $100, and with that in mind, take a new course of action. You may say, well, I really don't need this for that long of a period of time. I'll leave $100 in the bank, and what I'm going to do is invest the other $100 into something that's perhaps a bit more risky, and I'm going to be separated from my money for a longer period of time, but I will also be receiving a higher rate of interest. Okay, it's that relationship that we talked about. The creativity in decision making is vital for effective choices. What this means is that we have to be able to look at these things that we're facing, the situation that we're facing, and be open to not salespeople necessarily, but open to trying to understand the best path forward, what it is that we can do to make the proper choices that where we're not hurting ourselves in terms of opportunity cost. The rates of return are too low, and there are other options that, with that 1% return on the bank. So we have to think about some other way of getting a higher rate of return. This is where that creativity. And lastly, electing do nothing can be a dangerous alternative. So back to our $100. Forget about even at the bank. We don't feel even secure with the bank, but what we can do is we can take that $100 and we can hide it away somewhere, bury it wherever. So we're not doing anything with it. It's just sitting there. The problem with that, of course, is that the danger of doing, this possibly dangerous alternative is that we're missing out on interest, period. So our $100, just say it's 10% rate of return, $100 at the end of 1 year, we're missing out on additional $10. So our $100 that we had is really worth some number less than $100 in our real sense. This is when we start getting into real and nominal, and that stuff we will talk about again going forward. I'm going rather slow here, and I'll try to pick up the pace, but hopefully you're kind of getting the idea. So step 4 in this circular flow, if you will, for this financial decision making is evaluate those alternatives Firstly, the consequences of your choices. Opportunity cost, opportunity cost, opportunity cost. What you give up by making a certain choice, really the true cost of that. Giving up that $100, setting it aside, putting it into the bank, you are what? Foregoing the purchase of something else. And specifically, there's an expression, your next best option is really something to really focus on. And so what we're saying by this is that when we're looking at opportunity cost, we're looking at the thing that we forego, the next thing. So rather than save that $100 and getting that 1% rate of return or 10% whatever rate of return on it, what we're giving up is our next best competitive option, which would be all else equal. It's another economics expression, et ceteris paribus in Latin, but it's neither here nor there. The point is that what it is that we're giving up our next best competitive option. Our next best competitive option might be to buy that that new outfit because you want to use that for your new job, and you decide that you can forego, you can pass up on that decision in order to save that money for that year. The next concept, which kind of weaves into this, and there's oftentimes confusion, if you will, between opportunity cost and the trade-off. The trade-off specifically looks at what it is that you're giving up, the trade-off. So you're going to opt to study for an exam, so you're trading off the option of going to a movie. When we could go out to go to movies, I'm not even sure if we can at this point, but you get the idea. So that's the trade-off. It may refer to the value or the time that you give up. It's whatever that is that you're giving up. Separate from opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is very specific. So there are trade-offs. There's opportunity costs associated with everything, every decision that we make. Every decision, I can't think of any decisions that do not involve opportunity costs, where we're constantly weighing what our next best competitive option is. And the trade-off is that kind of that measurement of that opportunity cost, if you will. So you're measuring the amount of money that you're foregoing, and so on and so forth. Okay, so opportunity cost is the decision, and the trade-off is the amount of that, the amount that decision actually costs you, if you will. And again, last thing we're looking at, decision making will be an ongoing part of one's life. Absolutely. We all know this. There's always change. So whenever we encounter change, we have to make decisions. And this being from the time we get up in the morning until the time we go to bed at night, hopefully. Consider the lost opportunities that will result from each, considering lost opportunities that will result from each decision. This is, again, weighing that opportunity cost, looking at the trade-off that's associated with that opportunity cost, okay? Evaluating the alternatives, continuing, evaluating risk, uncertainty is part of every decision. Considering inflation risk, interest rate risk, income risk, personal risk, liquidity risk. What this means, again, risk means that for this time value of money, for you to be separated from your money, there's risk. There's inherent risk in that. That's associated with that. That risk is actually called default risk, meaning, or credit risk is actually another meaning for it. So default or credit risk, meaning that there's a risk that you will not receive back your capital, your $100. And I keep going back to this, and I apologize, but it's something that we start with at $100. I could always come up with a zillion other examples, but we'll stick with that for the moment. Inflation risk. Back to what we said about doing nothing. So we get 1% return on our at the bank, and we say, well, it's just not worth that risk. That the risk of the bank going bankrupt. How about that? So we opt to hold on to that $100. But what we find is that by measuring inflation is the change in overall prices. So you can look at drill down on different types of prices in different areas and so on and so forth. But in general, when we talk about inflation, we're talking about an increase in the weighted average of prices over overall weighted average of prices. And the inflation risk, say for example, the inflation was 1%. So after 1 year, with our $100 safely stowed under our mattress, we find out that that $100 in a real sense, when you factor in inflation, when you adjust for inflation, has actually been reduced to $99. Whereas if you had kept it in the bank, that $100, you would have had 1% return on that, and that would have offset that inflation risk. Interest rate risk, what that implies again is that if you have a example, you have that $100, you say, well, 1% is not good enough. But so what I'll do is I'll decide to set it aside for 5 years, and I will be getting back 2% a year for 5 years. So I set it up that way, and I agree to not touch the money for 5 years. And what happens, say in year 2, the overall inflation rate or whatnot goes up, goes up a percent or two, and interest rates for new loans goes up. So whereas you have a loan that still has 3 years to go, and you're earning 2% a year, the new loans that are being issued by that same bank, I shouldn't say issued, but they're the rates of return that they're offering are they go from 2% up to 3 or 4 or 5%. We'll just say 4%, so double what you're currently earning. What happens to the value of your $100 as a result? You're missing out on interest, and this is where interest rate risk comes along. Income risk, personal risk, liquidity risk, these are all very, very straightforward. The income risk is what is the potential for your income falling going forward. The personal risk that deals with, that goes into such things as health risks and a zillion other types of risk. And lastly, the liquidity risk. Liquidity risk, it goes back to, we'll just, kind of an easy example of this would be, you have liquidity risk that would be associated with, so you buy a house. You buy a house for $100,000, and what happens is that the value of the house, the reason you bought it was, you're looking at it in terms of an investment, and the value of homes have been going up, so you thought, oh, can't go wrong with that. And so you set your money aside in this home that has, looking forward for 30 years, and what happens is that you find out that the value of your home is actually going down. So you feverishly try to sell the property. There's a problem with that and the problem with liquidity risk is that it's the time associated with it, the time and the certainty. Liquidity basically means the time associated with and the certainty of receiving back your investment, if you will. So the most liquid of assets would be money. Money being, again, cash, coins, so on and so forth, and cash, credit, cash, coins, and checking account. That's money. So liquidity risk is the associated the problems that are associated with trying to turn that house back into cash. It's going to take a while. Secondly, you don't know what the value of that home is going to be, especially in light of the fact that we already know that the value is going down because the value of the house is actually going down. So this speaks to liquidity risk. How quickly you can turn whatever that asset is into cash, back into cash, or into your safe checking account, right? Financial planning information sources to minimize risk, gather relevant information from print media sources, financial institutions, financial specialists. Much of this you can do on your own. And I really encourage you to do these things, and we'll talk about them more specifically as you go along. Yes, it's important to have, good financial advice and so on and so forth, but it's it's something that goes back to someone told me a long time ago about you being your own best mechanic, if you will. What that means is that you have to have as good of an understanding of this process of your financial your financial situation, uh, as good of a take on it as you possibly can, so that you can do the proper financial planning, setting up your goals, going through this cycle again. A lot of this is very, very personalized, meaning that you have to do the legwork. It seems like it's rather daunting, and we'll get through it. We're going through this again step by step, but it's something that's absolutely necessary and rewarding. Types of risk, again, inflation risk, interest rate risk, income risk, personal risk, liquidity risk. We've already gone over these, but I encourage you to just walk through these and try to commit them to memory and make them your own. Inflation risk, inflation goes up, so there's a risk associated with that. Interest rate risk, again, borrowing at a lower risk interest rate than or borrowing or lending rather at a lower interest rate, depending upon which side of the table you're on, if you will. There's always a risk associated with those interest rates fluctuating, going up and down, because they always do go up and down. Income risk, personal risk, and lastly, the liquidity risk again. So step 5, financial planning process, create and implement your financial action plan. Tough one, but something that's actually rather straightforward. Develop an action plan that identifies ways to achieve your financial goals. So you want to be a millionaire, okay? How do you go about doing that? What is the path that you would take? What are the options that are set out there before you? Possible action plans can be increasing savings and reducing spending, increasing income by working extra hours, or making provisions for taxes. So this goes back to the whole idea of watching the pennies, and the dollars will take care of themselves. You hear all these old adages, the stuff that your grandparents talk about, or your parents, or whomever, but it's very, very true. There's an expression in baseball. When you think about small ball, think about focusing on how do you get somebody to first base, not about the home run that's going to get you right back into the ball game, but how it is that you move in that direction. It's always typically you love large steps. Everybody likes the easy path, but typically it's the slow, methodical path that actually wins out in the end. Typically it is. Okay, to implement it, you have to be, there's also the expression, it's better to be lucky than good, and that goes a long way as well, but we'll set that aside. Not many of us win the lottery, if you will. To implement the actions, you may need assistance from others. Yes, we always need assistance from others, if and only if, for some advice from others, like how it is that they were able to achieve what they were able to achieve. You may not want to hear it. Hard work is hard work, and so on and so forth. But still, it's understanding. Getting some good feedback is absolutely imperative. Always, and I always tell my students this as well, is that always look for the source data. Always follow up on these things. Don't just take people in for their word for these things. Follow up. Sorry about the howling in the background there. So financial planning decisions need to be assessed regularly. Ongoing. This is ongoing. We're constantly doing this on a daily, if not more than a daily basis. Doesn't mean you go out and look at your investments, every hour on the hour. But what you do have to do is evaluate where you're at and how it is that you're going to achieve the goals that you wish to achieve, and those change constantly. Complete review should be done on an annual basis, or even more frequently if you want. But it's not something. It's something that initially you probably will, but as you kind of move along, you tend to be a little more long view. You take the longer view. So again, more frequent reviews may be required for ongoing situations, changing factors, and so on and so forth. You can make and regular reviews really is it's kind of like going to the doctor for a checkup. It's something that we hate doing these things, and you're young, so you probably don't have to deal with this as much. But going in for regular checkups to determine where you're at and to fix things in a timely manner, okay, before they become critical. That's the objective. All right. So, objective 2, influences on personal financial planning. Assess personal and economic factors that influence personal financial planning, life situations, the adult life cycle. This is straight economics, and it's very, very important. And it's important for you to get your head wrapped around this life cycle, and they have it listed here as the adult life cycle. It's actually what's called the life cycle hypothesis, and it's the stages of your adult lifehood, really is what it is. So marital status, household size, employment, major events, graduations, engagements, career change, children, retirement, etc. What this really boils down to is very straightforward. When you're young, you don't have the financial resources, for sure. I mean, you never really do have enough, but we'll leave that aside. So you don't have the financial resources that you would like to prosecute, to live your life. Meaning that when you're young, say, for example, you want to start a family, you want an education, you want to start a family, you want to buy a car, you want to buy a home, all these things cost a lot of money. And most people do not have the financial resources or access to the financial resources from family members or any number of sources to really finance this with cash. So what do we have to do? We have to borrow. And so when you're young and you're getting started, you're borrowing a lot. You're working and you're doing all these things. And the idea is that in the first half of your life, you're what is called a net borrower, or a deficit budget unit. How about that term? Deficit budget unit, meaning that you're consuming more than you actually earn. Whereas when you get past a certain point, hopefully not too late, depending upon your life situation, economic situations, and various times, it could be as early as in your late 40s, we'll say. We'll just use that as a start point. Typically, it's quite a bit later, 50s, 60s, where you kind of turn the corner on this and you become a net lender, if you will, or a surplus budget unit. And what that means is that at that point in time, you're taking in more than is going out. So your net worth is in a positive framework, and you are a lender. You're lending to people. You're a net lender. You're buying stocks and bonds and investing in your house. May or may not be paid off, but let's just say your house is paid off. Your cars are paid off, and so you're kind of eliminated any kind of your debt position. So you're building up your reserves, and the reason you're doing that is that when you get older, you retire eventually, hopefully at some point, and when you retire, it means that you're no longer working, so you're no longer earning an income. And if you're no longer earning an income, do you still have to pay expenses? Yep, yes, you do, and they're ever mounting, if you will. But the point being is that nest egg that you build up, that's when you start to spend that. So you start to you start to sell off your investments, and as you're moving along. So this is the life cycle hypothesis, meaning that basically when you're young, you're a deficit spending unit, or you're a net borrower, and when you're old, prior to retirement, we'll say whatever that 10-year period is, we'll say when you're a net lender, where you're a surplus budget unit, you're lending money to those people on the other side of the fence, the deficit budget units. Very straightforward. And that's the adult life cycle, the life cycle hypothesis. And lastly, what they have here are values influence spending and saving decisions. These are all value judgments, and there's an expression in German. It's called it's value free, or wertfrei, I think is the word, is the term. And these values are what we have, meaning it's important for us to take regular vacations, so that becomes an expensive process, of course. And we all know people that save every dime that they've ever earned. Good, I guess. But these are all decisions that you make that are based on your own set of values. Financial systems and economic factors, this is walking through, and I'm going to, again, kind of shortcut this, but we've already talked about much of this, but this is how you get from one point to the other, meaning that on the left side, we'll start with the right side, because this goes back to our life cycle hypothesis that I had mentioned before. Users, borrowers, spenders of funds, individuals, businesses, government, foreign entities. These are net, when we're looking at it on a net basis, this is not entirely the case. It's not to say they don't borrow, but in a net sense, in an overall sense, the net deficit budget units are actually just businesses and governments. Business, think about it in this way. Have you ever heard the expression, other people's money? That's how you get ahead, by using other people's money, and that's what businesses do. It's nothing terrible about it. They're deficit budget units, right? You borrow in order to what? To grow your business, to expand your operation. This is really the sum total of it. And also, in addition to that, we're looking at, again, it's very much in keeping with what we had talked about before, when you're that life cycle hypothesis, the adult cycle that the author refers to, and that is that when you're young, you borrow. Okay, you're net borrowers really when you're young, and then when you get older, you become net lenders, or you move from deficit budget unit to surplus budget unit. Okay, so onward we go. So when we talk about businesses, they can be on both sides, but the intermediaries between they're called financial intermediaries, and financial intermediaries include banks, credit unions, and they're called depositories, insurance companies, investment companies, other financial institutions. So there's a whole laundry list of what we're talking about: depository institutions, lending institutions, pension funds. It goes on and on and on. And the takeaway from this is that the providers of those resources on the left go through the financial intermediaries, and the financial intermediaries, again, are the go-betweens, where between them and the end users, if you will. So they take possession, and this is where that time value of money comes into play. When you're paying insurance premiums, or you're investing in stock market, and so on and so forth. And those are the financial markets that are down below that we're talking about, that are where the money goes through, again, changing hands from the providers to the users. Okay, and we're really talking about financial intermediaries, and these are it's called transformation process, meaning that they take possession. The credit unions take possession of $100 of your $100, and they're paying you 1% interest a year. And what they do is they lend that out to businesses, government, individuals, so on and so forth. And by lending that out to those individuals, they get a higher rate of return, that margin. So they may lend it out for 2% a year and get an additional 1% back, so far as on a net gain between the users and providers. And the reason is that we have these intermediaries, these financial markets, and so on and so forth, is that you don't really need those. You could this could all be done between individuals. So you could have the users and the providers coming together, if you will, the borrowers and the savers, the investors, coming together between themselves. This is called direct finance. It happens. But this is, you've probably never heard this from your parents. I'm joking. But someone lends money to a sibling or someone else, and on a very personal note, it can become very dangerous. This is something that it's fraught with peril. That's why we go through other people. Okay, really, because uh, your cousin Vinny wants to borrow $100 from you, and but the problem is that cousin Vinny says, no, I don't want to pay you any interest, and you're saying, first off, I don't trust my cousin Vinny, and if I do lend it to cousin Vinny, I'm not going to be lending it to him at 1% that I can get at the bank. I'm going to be lending it to him at a much higher rate. So this is where that exchange stops, is that you have to have similar needs and so on and so forth. It just is not compatible. Anyway, you get the idea. So the financial system economics is a study of how wealth is created, and that's one good explanation for it, sure. Where it's at any rate forces supply and demand on setting prices. This is where the market dictates what those prices are, supply and demand, right? That's where that clearing price is at. The economic environment institutions. And that's back to what we talked about, financial intermediaries, financial markets, and so on and so forth. And the Federal Reserve, they mentioned this slightly here, and this is pretty straightforward. The Federal Reserve Bank, or the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, is probably more accurate, more encompassing. Federal Reserve banks have there are different Federal Reserve banks throughout the country. For example, Detroit is out of Chicago, so I think there are 12. I should know this stuff by heart, but there are different Federal Reserve banks, and the overall system is called the Federal Reserve System, and the Federal Reserve Board of Governors resides in Washington, D.C. And the idea is they have many objectives. Their mandates are many, but let's look at it in terms of macroeconomics. We're looking at price level changes. So we're looking at inflation, economic growth, and we're also looking at it in terms of jobs. Okay, so we're looking at those three, and their objective is to make sure that's as smooth as possible. So if inflation is running rampant, the one way you could do that is by having interest rates higher, because the higher the interest rate, back to businesses borrowing, the more difficult the decision it is, the higher the opportunity cost associated with that business, those individuals borrowing. So if it's 0% interest to buy a new car, that encourages people to purchase new cars. But if there are too many people purchasing vehicles and the inflation starts to kick off, the shortest, the easy, or the I don't want to say the shortest, the easiest way, but a proven way of kind of remedying the situation is for interest rates to go up. So the Federal Reserve system has, and the Federal Reserve banks have significant responsibility in controlling what's called monetary policy. Monetary policy, primarily, we're looking at interest rates. Okay, we'll talk more as we kind of go through. Global influences, there are always things good that are going on globally. Global economy influences personal finance. Does what happens in China impact us? Absolutely. In Europe, yes, absolutely. American companies compete against foreign companies for U.S. dollars. I don't like that expression, but yes, we're competing with foreign countries all the time. And the balance of exports and imports is it's actually published through the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and that data, when we're looking at goods and services and so on and so forth, a lot of this is driven by the value of the dollar, the worth of the dollar. If the dollar is more expensive for other countries, so if goods are produced in the U.S. are more expensive than, because the value of the dollar is higher, then that discourages exports from the U.S. to those other countries. And conversely, if the value of the dollar is down, that encourages exports from the U.S. to other countries. Long relationship. This has to do with international finance, international economics, a topic that goes well beyond the scope of this course, but you get the idea. There's much, much more to it. Foreign investment and their role in the U.S. money supply. Yes, so the U.S. currently has about $28 trillion in debt, meaning the federal debt is quickly approaching $30 trillion when a year ago we were probably at $22-23 trillion. And that's all come to us what? The result of the coronavirus, dealing with COVID-19. It's caused significant issues. And they're the primary investors, if you will, the owners of the U.S. debt, actually are from the U.S., but a smaller portion, we'll just say one-fourth of that debt is held by foreign interest, and the majority of that is held, the two largest holders of U.S. debt are China and Japan. They kind of go back and forth. But point being is that they definitely have an influence on the economy, and something, again, we don't really get into too much in this class, but just to put it out there. And we also have foreign investors in the U.S. So, for example, when we look at BP gasoline, for example, that's BP stands for British Petroleum. It's a British concern. Or Shell. Shell is a Dutch company. Anyway, trade deficit lasting also affects the cost, the value of the money side and the cost of items being purchased by consumers. The U.S., for example, has been running trade deficits for the last 30 years, give or take. Maybe even 35 at this point, but 30 years, I guess we'll say. And anyways, it's something that we will touch upon perhaps more later in the class. Changing economic conditions and financial decisions, consumer prices, consumer spending, interest rates, and money supply, unemployment, housing starts, GDP. GDP is a gross domestic product. How fast the economy itself is growing. The trade balance is the difference between the countries, again, exports and imports. The different indexes that are out there, the Dow Jones averages, the S&P, the Russell index, small company index, and so on and so forth. It just has these are all metrics. These are all things that we measure the health of the economy, how the stocks, how much the stock market is actually worth, how much it changes on a daily basis. Again, we'll be getting into that as we move along. First, we're looking at consumer price. Inflation is again, we said this before, is the rise in the general level of prices. The rule of 72, it's interesting that it's introduced here, but this is my favorite. This is one of these things that when you take away, it's either the rule of 72 or the rule of 70. You divide 72 by the annual inflation rate. An annual inflation rate of 4% means that the prices of your this is an interesting application, I should say, but the inflation rate rises 4%. That's 72 divided by 4 is 18. 18 years, and I know that it looks like 0.04 whatever, but the point is that the takeaway is that we're just looking at these kind of whole numbers, if you will. 72 divided by 4 is 18. So in 18 years, your money will double if there's an inflation rate. I shouldn't say your money will double, but the price of that given these overall items in that country, the cost, if you will double over the course of 18 years. Deflation is the decline in prices, the average rate, and we have seen deflation. We've seen deflation in several cases over the last several years. We've seen deflation. So we'll talk more about this again as we go. Consumer spending. Consumers, this is something that's kind of an easy one to remember as well. Consumers account for about 60, or we'll just say, yeah, 60% of overall spending in the economy. So who are the other spenders? Business, government. So for example, most of the spending that's done, this is why you say why consumer spending is so important. It's the majority of overall spending in an economy is done by whom? By consumers, by you and me. Interest rates represent the cost of money. Interest rates they're a price. So just as when we talk about the price of a pound of hamburger, or the price of a gallon of gasoline, the interest rate is the price of money. Meaning, if you're the lender, it's how much you're going to be expecting in return for your investment. And if you're the borrower, how much you have to actually pay, the cost of that money, over the course of whatever that period of time in interest rates. Selecting your path to financial security, do something, save for emergencies. What this means is that there are things you do right up front. Always keep in mind that you pay yourself first, if at all possible. That aside, and we'll be getting into that as we move forward, you have to save for those emergencies and also consider the future. Think about the future. I know when you're young, you tend not to. You think that there's the sense of mortality, and I know I'm speaking overly generally, in generalities rather about this, but I think you kind of understand this, is that you're not thinking as much about 5, 10, 20 years from now. You're thinking more about it in terms of today, tomorrow, etc. That's not entirely fair, but you get the idea. Maintain a low level of debt. Try to focus on that. It's understanding that, yes, in finance, the rule is that if you have a positive cash flow, then an investment, that purchase decision is a go. However, you have to consider your overall debt position, your overall outlays, your overall cost, and you really have to understanding the risks that are embedded in all that, which leads us to what? Having that risk management plan, trying to keep your risk low but manageable. In order to get a reasonable rate of return, there has to be some risk. You're encumbering some risk. Avoid excuses. Yeah, that's one for us and one for the ages, all of us. Just try to be as straightforward as you can with yourself. Rate your current situation. Set your mind on what it is you would like to do, like in an overall sense, and also try to be very specific about things too, in order to achieve that overall sense and develop that personal finance mission statement, which basically means that you say to yourself, okay, here, this is one for you. I would like to retire by the age of 55, for example. I'm past that point, but that's okay. I want to retire by the age of 55. So keeping that in mind, always with that in the back of your mind, you set your goals in order to achieve that. If you get it done earlier, good on you. If you hit it when you're 55, fantastic. If you're a little over it, it's okay. If you can't ever retire, there's something positive to be said about that too. There's an old expression is that to retire is to expire. So work is not a bad thing. Okay, developing personal financial goals, developing those personal financial goals. Rather, financial goals can be influenced by the time frame in which you want to achieve your goals, can be influenced by the type of financial needs that drive your goals. So all these parameters that are out there, that scaffolding that we had talked about, how it is that we can fit into that framework. How can we achieve those goals? How do we get from point A to point B? Setting up our priorities. The one thing I can guarantee you is that your priorities will change. How much, the extent, I can't promise you that. I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that they will change. Types of financial goals, timing of goals, short term within. This is setting up your how do I want to put it in your short-term goals and long-term goals, your your action plan versus your strategic looking forward, your goals that are involved, that in order to achieve those goals. And remember always that your short-term goals are everything. The longer your goal, the longer the term that we're looking at, the more likely that will change. And that's why it's important for longer term goals, as specific as we would like to be. The long-term goals have to be a little bit more general. Strategic goals have to be a bit more general rather than those short-term goals that we're talking about. So again, there's the long-term goals should be planned in coordination with short-term, and what this means is as your plan moves along, as your forecast, as you get closer to your current situation, if you will, as you're moving forward, the more quickly that will change, and your long-term goal that was from 5 years ago has become what your 1 year goal today. So this is you're actually changing that. You still have a 5-year goal, but it's far different than your 5-year goal was than from 5 years ago, most likely. Anyway, all that aside, goals for different financial needs, consumable product goals, durable product goals. So consumer goods versus durable goods, intangible purchase goals. What this boils down to is that, so your consumable product goals, those are the very, very short term, meaning that you have to eat on a daily basis. You have to drink on a daily basis. Well, you have to drink more than you have to eat, of course. You can go longer without food, but I digress. Point being, again, that these consumable product goals are very, very short term. And they're repetitive over and over again, that we've got to buy these things, versus the durable product goals or the durable goods goals. And those would be purchasing vehicles. You don't buy a new vehicle or a vehicle every year or every 6 months, hopefully. Hopefully, again, you're looking at a purchase of a vehicle that's going to last you X number of years. And year is kind of a good point of departure, if you will. Consumable goods, consumer goods, if you will, would be less than 1 year, and durable goods would be longer than 1 year. Appliances, cars, homes, etc. And the intangible goods that we're talking about that probably has more to do with services, meaning that just the intangibles, the things that you really can't, maybe a vacation, so on and so forth. That's not quite, but you get the idea. The others are very, very straightforward. Consumer goods are very short term, durable, longer goods. Intangible things you really can't put your finger on, precisely. So I like this. Goal setting guidelines, SMART. You always use these acronyms, right? Specific, know exactly what your goals are to create a plan. Measurable, always have to measure these things. This is extremely important. Action oriented, being able to adjust to these things, being realistic. And realistic, it changes, meaning that, what's realistic today may not be realistic tomorrow. Our situation may improve or may worsen, so you've got to be able to adjust to these things. And the time-based means to give yourself, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, all of us do, we have to live by deadlines. And this is where the time-based piece of it comes into this. Really try to focus on that. So specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-based, SMART. This is good stuff. So opportunity cost and the time value of money, calculate the time value of money to analyze personal financial situations. And again, we've already been through this, but this is, again, where this concept of opportunity cost is going to be coming up over and over and over and over again. And the relationship between the personal and the financial opportunity cost. This is it's another good way of kind of measuring these things, balancing, weighing these things, the importance of the automobile. how does it impact you in a personal sense, and how does it impact you in a financial sense? Is really what it boils down to. Okay, and okay, sorry about the background noise on occasion, folks. Personal opportunity cost. So drilling down on that topic, every financial decision involves giving up something to obtain something you consider more desirable. Again, it's that foregoing principle. What it is you're surrendering, what is it you're forgiving. Uh, the what rather than the extent of the what that you're forgiving. The extent of the what you're foregoing rather that's the trade-off. The actual transaction itself, the two different options themselves, that is the opportunity cost. The difference between the two opportunity costs, that is the trade-off, if you will. Personal resources like financial resources require careful management. All these things we have to keep an eye on, and all these things we have to consider. And at the end of the day, when we roll the dice, which we always have to do, we make our decisions, and we have to live with those decisions oftentimes. Um, Here's one for you. Have you ever regretted anything you've ever done? It's a loaded question because every time we make a purchase, we have what? We have regrets. Meaning we wish that we had done something else with the money perhaps, or we wish that we'd had researched this a bit more. But bear in mind that when you make these transactions, you're making these transactions with someone else. And they're weighing the same thing. So, for example, you bring two people together, and one is buying something and the other one is selling something. Obviously, that's something obviously. And there's buyer's remorse and seller's remorse that's involved after the fact, of course. And so this is that always understanding this, that it's another very, very important point, is a concept in economics called sunk cost. Sunk cost is a fixed cost, and we'll get into that perhaps a bit later on. But sunk cost, what that means is that you can't change the decision. You spent this lecture is going on for well over an hour now, and by the time you've listened to this, you've already immersed yourself in an hour and a half roughly of listening. That's sunk cost. You can't get that time back. As not much perhaps as you wish you might have. Hopefully you're taking that as a joke. But anyways, the point being is that all these things, they take considerable thought. But it's also important to understand that once we make our decisions, we can make more decisions to correct them and so on and so forth going forward. But you can't change that decision. And the sooner you come to grips with that, we've all run into people that live their lives in the past. Even at this young age for you, you've run into people that they live their life that's filled with regrets. And I hope you can see why that is a problem, why that is something that it's a fool's game, it's a fool's errand, meaning that since you can't retrieve that what's been lost, you have to come to grips with that and then move on to your next decision that you make, the next mistake that you make. Anyway, I'm done with that. So financial opportunity costs, we've talked about personal, there are also financial opportunity costs, of course. Same idea is that if you, for example, decide to invest in your bank account and you get 1% a year, and you find out after year one you only receive 1%, you only receive $1 interest, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what the heck was I thinking? Can't change that. But what you can do is alter your decision kind of going forward. If I'm not going to need that $100 for next year, maybe I can forego it, set it aside for more than 1 year, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 years. And by doing that, of course, this involves the time value of money, which also means what? The interest rate that you would expect to receive would go up. This is the financial opportunity cost. Or it can go the other way too. Wanted to buy a new vehicle, but you were afraid to buy a new vehicle and you'd rather try to save the money, and So you start your new job and you're driving to work on the first day and your car breaks down halfway there. It's never happened before to any of us, right? Not. It always happens. These things always occur. So the point is that you can't change that. You can rectify it by going out and making that purchase, hopefully if your job is still available for you. But you get the idea. Financial opportunity costs are very easily measured, if you will, in financial means. So people ask you, oh, what did you get last year? The market returned 20%, and you look at your investment portfolio, whatever that is, whatever the amount that you have, and you find out that you earn 10%, then that's when you start thinking, wait a minute, if everybody else earned 20%, now you earn 10%, what am I doing wrong? Maybe nothing, because maybe next year that 20% that they earned has gone down to goes down to 5%, and your 10% investment stays at 10%, and you're steady going forward. All these decisions involve what? Opportunity cost. Time value of money, first thing, interest calculation. 3 amounts are required to calculate the time value of money: the principal, the interest rate, and the time period involved. Very straightforward. Principal is the amount of money, the $100. The interest rate is at 10%, we'll say, and it's that annual interest rate of 10%, and the time period is 1 year. So what you would be getting back, the value of your investment, the value of your money after 1 year would be $110. And it goes out calculating from that it's called a geometric rate going forward. But the point is that depending upon the time period involved, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, etc., typically interest rates are you can look at it at an annual rate. Sometimes you can look at it on a daily. So how many days are there in a year? 365 or 366. Interest rates can be calculated that way too. So it's, again, principal, the amount that you're talking about, the rate that you're talking about. What rate? When we talk about rate, we're talking about the percentage rate over a period of time. All right. Computing simple interest is savings times the annual interest rate times the time period interest involved. So in this case, we're looking at the example that they use is $500. We forget about my $100. So $500 times 6% times 6 months out of 12 months, so that's 1/2 a year. 500 times 0.06 times 1/2 is $15. In 6 months, your $500 principal will earn you 15%. Therefore, after 6 months, your total will be $515. All right, very straightforward. And when you start compounding, it gets a bit more tricky, but you get the idea. That's the main takeaway from this. The methods for calculating time value of money: formula calculation, time value of money tables, financial calculators, spreadsheet software, websites, and apps. There are so many apps out there, so many websites that you can turn to for these formulas and just kind of plug them in. It's extremely simple. It's complicated. It's worth walking through time value money tables, frankly, and you can actually do the calculations, of course, on your own longhand, or using financial calculators, or again using other formula calculations to arrive at your goal. But you get the idea, is that there are ample resources out there available for you to determine the time value of money. So we're looking at future value, present value. Starting with future value is the amount in which your current savings will increase based on a certain interest rate in a certain period of time. This is where that word compounding comes up. It's the earning interest rate on the previously earned interest. So compounding, adding to that interest upon how your principal plus the interest, and then you add on more interest, how much that is growing going forward. Compounding allows for the future value of a deposit to grow faster than it would if interest rates were paid only on the original deposit. So of course, back to that example, we'll walk through this. $100 deposit at 6%, account for 1 year will grow to $106. This amount is computed as follows. Future value is equal to 100 times 6%, at 0.06 times 1 year is $106. Moving forward from that, future value can be computed for a single amount or for a series of deposits or payments, which is called an annuity. annuity, the word annual comes from, annuity comes forth from that annuity idea. Idea again is that when we're computing for a single amount or for a series of deposits or payments called an annuity, okay? Present value, we talk about future value. Present value is the opposite, is the current value of a future amount based on a certain interest rate and certain time period involved. Present value calculations are also called discounting. So we had the annuity, and then we had compounding rather, and now I've got discounting. The annuity versus discounting. The present value of the amount you want in the future will always be less than the future value. Present value will be computed for a single amount or for a series of deposits. All right. So the calculations, achieving your financial goals, rather. We'll get to the calculations that are involved with that at another point. But again, identify strategies for achieving your personal financial goals for different life situations. So this is a combination of, what we're looking at as we're, the different components of this course as we're moving ahead. So one is the part one, rather, is obtaining those resources, and chapters 3 and 4 gets into planning and the actual planning of your personal finances, that first quarter of the piece of the pie, managing your personal finances, how you go about savings and the saving part and the borrowing part, how you're managing your personal finances going forward, making personal decisions on the lower left quadrant, if you will, spending and managing risk, and the last piece is going to be investing, controlling your financial future. So the investing in financial resources, we'll touch upon that rather briefly. And the last piece of this is controlling your financial future, and we're looking at retirement and estate planning. So this is the life cycle that we were talking about earlier. So again, walking through the various components that we were looking at, and so developing flexible financial plan. A financial plan is a formalized report that summarizes your current financial state. These are things that we all do in our heads, if nothing else, but when we can formalize them, put them on a piece of paper using Excel spreadsheets, something where you can actually document what your goals are, what your plan is to achieve those goals, so on and so forth. It's very important. All right. Your financial plan can be created by you with the assistance of a financial planner and made using money management software. Again, there's numerous out there, and there are numerous ideas presented in the book as well. Implementing that financial plan, develop your good financial habits. Remember what we talked about, the straightforward things. You get up in the morning, you stretch. Okay, may I stretch? I have to. Take a shower, brush my teeth, have breakfast, so on and so forth, do some exercises, etc., and then on with your day. So lastly, when we're studying personal finance, there are others as well, but just to cut to the chase, there are a zillion personal finance aids out there that are available. And we don't have this, there's a Connect thing that's associated with this book. We don't have to go there, but the point is that there are numerous sources, online sources, and that are out there available for us. Okay. Anyway, I've gone overboard on this first chapter, so we'll have to cut it short going forward, hopefully. Thank you.